Hi, my name is Justin Gordon, and today, more and more young people are feeling increasingly alienated by politics. And there's a very, very simple reason why. Every day, it feels like special interests have more power in this country, leaving less power for average folks like us. When that happens, we feel like democracy is not working for us. We feel like it's not looking out for us. And that's the prime equation for political apathy. And there's one reason why this is happening: campaign finance. Our politicians are fundamentally being bought. We have fundamentally legalized bribery in this nation. But there's something we can do, luckily. The United States federal government has to and must pass campaign finance legislation now. Now, I've worked on several campaigns, both in and out of the finance department, and I've done extensive research on this subject, so I'm qualified to speak on this topic today. So let's talk about campaign finance. First, we're going to talk about what the problem is, why there's a problem, and what it is. Two, we're going to talk about several specific policy proposals that will alleviate this problem. And three, I'm going to show you some specific examples of things that happened in the past and are happening currently that have curbed this problem in our country. So first, let's talk about what the problem is, all right? So Citizens United v. FEC in 2010 fundamentally restructured how our elections are bought for and paid for. In 2002, the BCRA, the Bipartisan Campaign Finance Reform Act, also referred to as the McCain-Feingold, I'll probably call it McCain-Feingold from now because that's easier, basically banned independent expenditures within certain periods of an election. Independent expenditures are things that you see on TV that may not be explicitly ran past a candidate. A candidate hasn't specifically approved this ad, but it's being used to advocate for or against the election of a candidate. It's what's called an electioneering communication, all right? So prior to 2010, between 2002 and 2010, corporate funds, including labor unions, could not be used for these purposes. They could not pay for these kind of ads, okay? They had effectively banned them from engaging in political activity that way. But with Citizens United v. FEC, the Supreme Court ruled that those bans were unconstitutional due to the First Amendment. They're saying fundamentally that spending money is political speech, which is protected under the First Amendment. So the problem now, after Citizens United, spending just on Senate elections, the independent expenditure spending on just Senate elections, more than doubled. In 2010, around $220 million was spent on Senate elections, and then in 2014, around $470 million was spent on just Senate elections alone. That's a huge jump. Once again, more than a doubling in just 4 years. And looking at midterm elections there too. So something you would expect to have a lesser financial burden than a presidential election. Then we're going to look at again in 2018, once again, another midterm election. The Center for Responsive Politics estimates that around $5 billion, a little over $5.2 billion was spent on the 2018 midterm elections. So there's clearly so much money, too much money in politics. And when we're looking at independent expenditures, these are really things that people, that lobbyists are spending money on and still gaining influence with politicians. There's no non-coordination between these two groups. It's really just a loophole that has legalized bribery. There's no enforcement apparatus to stop lobbyists or political action groups from engaging in discourses with candidates, which is against the law. So no action's been taken to curb this problem. There's been a bunch of legislation in the House passed in the last 2 years that has not been taken up by the Senate. But of course, this is a bipartisan issue too. Plenty of Democrats are getting a lot of money. Beto O'Rourke raised $38 million in 2018. And this is not a cut and dry along the partisan edges thing, okay? So two, we know there's a problem. Let's talk about what we can do to fix this problem, all right? First, we want to reinstitute the BCRA standards that were struck down by Citizens United. And I think we can do this by changing some legal definitions. But of course, I think if we just look back to 2002 and in prior years and see the amount of money spent on elections, we can totally tell that these standards worked, that less money was spent prior to these laws. And it was an appropriate amount of money, at least in a stopgap kind of way. So within the BCRA, we're going to look at the definition of electioneering communication. We're going to change that definition to get past the Citizens United ruling. And then we're going to decrease legal classifications, because that's another thing. Former Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia said in oral arguments that these laws are too complicated. So we're really going to try to rein in and rein back some of these classifications on the contribution side. And then we're going to create an FEC business exemption, which we think is also going to skirt the Citizens United decision, that it's going to allow companies to engage in quote-unquote electioneering communications that aren't necessarily political communications, like a Donald Trump MAGA hat. Manufacturing those could get corporate money, because it's not necessarily for or against trying to persuade people in an election kind of sense thing. So I think that's okay to let corporate money be used for that. So now let's look at some examples of how this did work. The BCRA, like I said before, worked. So we know that these standards that we just want to re-implement worked. Two, we're going to look at Montana. Montana Governor Steve Bullock has put a lot of emphasis into campaign finance reform. And it's worked in Montana. Montana is known around the country as one of these states that has the most transparent, the most quote-unquote democratic, small d democratic elections. All right? And three, we want to go back to some of the original FECA, Federal Election Campaign Act stuff from 1972. These are what we're going to use to reduce the classifications, because most of the expansion of the contribution classifications have come in the years since 1972, when that first major legislation was passed. So we think if we just revert a lot of these things back to pre-2000 kind of standards, we're going to reduce a lot of the danger that's happened, a lot of the polarization that's happened in the 21st century. So today, we've talked a lot about campaign finance reform. I've thrown a lot of legalese at you. I hope you got most of it. But we talked about what the problem is. We talked about what we can do to fix the problem. We talked about several things that we've already done to fix the problem. All right? So contacting your elected representative would be a great way to get started on this and take our democracy back. Thanks.